Welcome to Infertility and Me podcast, a show that amplifies diverse stories about the struggles of infertility and fertility in a safe space. Our goal is to normalize fertility stories that validate, give hope, and create a community where no one is left silently suffering. Hey, you guys, welcome back to another episode of Infertility and Me podcast. If this is your first time, my name is Monique Farouk. Thank you and welcome, and thank you for hitting that play button on today's episode, whether you're on YouTube and or your favorite audio streaming platform. I do not take it for granted that you have chosen to be here today to listen to stories of infertility, fertility struggles, and or loss. And so I thank you again. And today's guest is Ms. Narelle Hudson. She is a counselor as well as a naturopathic specialist, and she has a practice in Brisbane, Australia, which she began after her own story to motherhood and through loss and infertility. And you can find Narelle on Instagram at Narelle, Narelle Hudson, Hudson. And you can also connect with her through her website if you're in the area of Australia, and well, specifically Brisbane, I should say, and you would like to seek her services. You can connect with her on Instagram first and go to her website and learn more about her and her practice. To be fair, for today, for those of us who have recently suffered losses, I will ask that you come back to this episode if you don't have the strength or are not up to being able to hear a story of loss and it's just too emotional and too unbearable at the moment. Do come back, save this episode though before you go, and then come back and watch it at a later time when you're feeling a little better, because this story does involve great loss, and that of premature birth at 23 weeks gestation, which Narelle tells us about, as well as her book. She wrote a book about I don't even think it's been a year since she wrote it, and it was recently published, which is in the show notes as well for you to tap and go and to connect to the platform that sells her book so that you can purchase it for yourself, especially if you have or are dealing with loss at the moment. And that book is called Dream, Learning to Live with Infertility and Loss. If you have recently suffered loss and you do not feel like you can handle that type of a story today and listening to it in your ear and or watching it in your visuals, save this episode and come back where you can. And if you know someone who has recently gone through it and you think this episode may be helpful for them, do share it, do pass it along and give it to them, whether it's a loved one and or a friend, because we absolutely cannot do these things on our own. But we'll be back in just a moment, you guys, with Narelle. So we're back, you guys, with our friend Narelle Hudson. Narelle, thank you so much again, dear, for coming onto the show and offering your story of loss and male factor infertility. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So I told you guys in the introduction that Narelle is from Australia, so it's very early where she is today while we're recording. And so, Narelle, can you start by telling us how you met hubby? How did that all transpire?
Taught at the same school together. I was a first year out of uni teacher, and my husband my husband now, Brett, taught at the same school, and we were both single, and my lovely little year 3 girls in the class that I taught used to say to me on the playground, "Oh, you're too pretty to not have a boyfriend, Miss Barnes is single." And they say, "Oh, Mr. Hudson is single." And yeah, it obviously wasn't them setting us up down the track yet.
Oh, I love that. That is so cute. And so did you always feel like you wanted to be a mom? Was that something that you foresaw, like after you became an adult and just started thinking about the long term of things? Was that something you always wanted?
Yes, definitely. Even before I was an adult, I think I was raised having babies. And, you know, when I was 12, she was already getting ladies for my future. So it was always on the cards and always something that just would happen even from the age of like 10 or 12. Yeah.
So how long were you guys married before you started talking about trying to conceive? Was it something that you just always had like hanging in the wind, like we're not trying, but we're not trying to do kind of thing?
Respect, because when I met Brett, he had just come out of a marriage, 3 children of his own, and so that was a conversation very early in our relationship, because for me it was a bit of a deal breaker with my future husband if he didn't want children, because that's how I always saw that my life would be. And so we had those conversations pretty early on before we even talked about marriage. You know, talking about, was he open to having more children even though he already had children? And if he wasn't, then, you know, that will be a big decision whether we continue the relationship. And then even before we got married, once Brett had said that, yes, he was open to having a child with me, we were going down other medical routes because he had already had a vasectomy. So we were already planning that and had an operation to try and reverse that, or we were even married.
Yeah. How old were you at the time when you guys were discussing all of this and planning it out?
So I was in my 20s, probably about 27-ish. Yeah.
Okay. So still in medical terms, very, very, very fertile years before 35. I don't know if it's the same there in Australia, but over here they give us till 35, and then we're toast. Like, it's no good after that. We have to seek help a lot earlier than we would if we were in our 20s. But yeah, for sure. You guys did the reversal of the vasectomy and everything, and so after that, did you guys try to conceive naturally on your own, or did you go straight into seeing a reproductive endocrinologist there?
The operation was done to reverse the vasectomy, and we hired the best person we could, who was the best in our city at the time, and everything went okay. And then a couple of days later, it just healed itself and the operation didn't work. So then there was no point trying to conceive naturally because it wouldn't have happened. So we started having the conversation about infertility treatment and IVF, which was a huge conversation and a huge grief already. Like, we were planning a wedding at the time.
Yeah. So you were doing all of that in the middle of, that makes sense. Just from what you told me about your story and how I'm thinking about your timeline of things and how it all transpired. Oh, wow. So it's devastating. It's overwhelming, all the feels and such. So how did you feel as the weeks went on, per se, and the months went on? How did you feel moving into having to go to a reproductive endocrinologist?
It's just a really, really difficult time trying to wrap my brain around the fact that I wasn't going to have children naturally. That was a huge loss for me. And just knowing that we had to go and do all of these medical things to have a chance of having children was just so far out of what I thought my life would look like. I'm such a natural person, like I'm a vegan. So foreign to me to think that the only way I was going to conceive was with all these fertility drugs and operations and medical people.
At this point, were you still teaching? At this point?
Yes, I was still teaching up until when we got married, and because of the waiting list for IVF and everything, we'd had our first appointment before we got married. And then we were due to start the IVF process and all got back from our honeymoon.
Gotcha.
And then about 6 months into the IVF treatment starting, I ended up leaving teaching because it was just so emotionally difficult for me to try and be in that space and teach other people's precious little babies when that wasn't a reality for me.
Yeah, that's why I asked. 'Cause I imagine it's very difficult for people in spaces with young children, nurses, teachers, all of you guys in those spaces. The emotional toll it can take, having to care for others' children when your journey yourself was so very difficult and you were dealing with so much grief and pain, so to speak, in a way. And so you guys go to you said that you had to wait. You were on a waiting list, and then you had your first appointment before you got married after you guys came back. So walk us through what happened after you guys came back and you had decided to resign as a teacher and what happened during that period.
So we decided to move out to a small country town and start the IVF process when the small country town wasn't equipped to do the daily blood tests and everything that you have to do during the IVF process. So it would have been really difficult to hold down a full-time job anyway, because I was having to travel 50 minutes into the city every morning just to have my blood test. And so, I was in the process of, business and everything. But it was a difficult time financially as well, not having that income coming in and all the costs of the So there was so much going on, so many different elements. A new marriage, financial problems.
That bonus mom going on. Were the children very young at this time? Were they elementary age or older?
Yes, at that age they were still in primary school.
Yeah. And so you mentioned just now, and I stated in your intro that you are a counselor and naturopathic Ayurveda specialist. And so you were studying to become what you do now at the time when you guys first started your in IVF treatments and such.
Yes, I was learning all the natural therapies, and they were really helpful for me to, I guess, heal myself during the process, learning Reikis and crystal healings and massages and those sort of things. I didn't actually start the counselling journey until a few years later.
Okay. And so let's start with the first. So did you have any you didn't have any diagnosis at all for female factor? It was just a male factor, right?
Yeah. You're thin and you're fertile. We'll get you. It'll be really easy. So, yes, she had already sort of assumed that there was nothing wrong with me.
Okay. So was there ever any diagnosis of any female issues or at all?
Yes, as we went through the process, turned out I have a bicornuate uterus, so I have a distinct double uterus with a wall down. That ended up causing problems. Yes.
Yes, okay, and so that explains a lot. Wow, okay. And so what point, well, I'll go back. How many cycles did you guys do of IVF before you became pregnant with your rainbow baby?
So it was a long journey. We did 4 cycles before they just became stumped and they couldn't work out what was. The person in her 20s was not pregnant yet, and then there were other operations, hysteroscopies, where they actually did some more invasive things to find out why the eggs weren't taking. And then that's where they realized that the eggs were not actually being put back in my uterus, and that's why we hadn't fallen pregnant.
Okay. And so when you say that the eggs hadn't been going into the uterus, that's when they found out that you had a bicornuate uterus then at that point, or somewhere around that time frame?
They already knew from the beginning, but they, for some reason, hadn't thought that it would change their process.
Oh, okay. I see. It makes sense, man. Okay, that makes sense. And so it was the 5th cycle where you guys got your BFP. And so had there ever been a time before that big fat positive that you had ever been pregnant at all in your entire life?
No, and that 5th cycle, we only got pregnant because they put the eggs back into my uterus under surgery. So it was when they realised that it hadn't been going in the right place for 4 cycles. So much emotion there. They did that invasive surgery where they look at all the pathway, then they had to sedate where they normally do in the transfer.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. I've heard of the ICSI cycles, but because your case was so much more difficult with having the bicornate uterus and all that, makes sense why it would have been a little bit more invasive than the average cycle. Wow. So were you getting any help therapy-wise? Were you getting, besides your spiritual practices and your Ayurvedic practices, what you were learning in school, were you getting help mentally to help deal with all of that?
No, not really. That's a big reason why I do what I do now, because as you probably know, most people don't want to talk about it. We weren't offered counselling through the IVF clinic, and I had attempted to find counsellors, but they weren't people who actually, or people I gelled with, and that's a huge part of counselling, that you have that rapport and you feel like you can talk to the person. That's part of the therapy. Yeah.
Absolutely. So would you say,
My husband really, and we're quite isolated.
You do you have you don't have a lot of family in the city where you guys were living in at the time?
No, they were in a different state, and so were most of my friends, or back in the city where we'd moved from. So it was literally just the two of us, and my husband's been a rock throughout the whole process. He's always been, so I also hear is quite rare. Lots of men really struggle to female partners when they're going through this process.
Yeah, and I think it's just hard for men to connect with their feminine emotions anyway, and when you go through something like this, it's like they feel like they have to be so strong and such a rock in the situation. So it's hard for everybody. It's just a really unfair situation and place to be in, as you already know. And wow. So you guys, so how did you feel then? What did you even believe what the specialists were telling you when they called you and told you that your numbers were good and it's looking like it might be a viable pregnancy?
We definitely believed in all the cycles leading this one until we found out that the eggs hadn't been going in the right spot, and then we were just so angry and so devastated that we'd been on this huge journey and they'd literally just been not doing a good job.
Yeah. And being more thorough, you would think, with the way that the process is for IVF, you would think that was something that they wouldn't have missed. It almost feels like they missed it, or they just, something wasn't clicking, and they're like, well, doggone, like that light bulb just goes off. Wow.
Yeah.
So were you using your studies to help you heal through and cope with everything that you were dealing with at the time, since you were studying as well?
Yeah, much. Yeah, lots of swaps and people, which I guess was my strategy to cope. And I'm very spiritual. Just giving it up to the universe whenever I wasn't coping anymore. And I've always been a writer, so that was my way of processing things as well. Just writing how I felt. Yeah.
So after you guys got your big fat positive, and so here in the U.S., I don't know if the process is different, but they call you you go in the morning, you get your blood test done, and they call you later on that day with your test results. Is it very similar in that way there in Australia with you guys as well?
It was throughout the whole process, but the way we found out we were pregnant was quite different, actually.
Oh, do tell. How did that happen?
So we'd crammed in the last cycle just before Christmas, and it turned out that I was going to be able to find on Christmas Day. And the clinic was closed of Christmas Day, and the nurses felt like friends at the stage. They were so beautiful, and one of them had said, I'm going to be on holidays up on the Gold Coast, and the clinic will be closed. You can find out on Christmas Day. Why don't you just go and buy yourself a test and do your own test, and you have to ring me. I'll be on holiday. No number, ring me and tell me the results on Christmas Day. And so that was another it was either going to be the best Christmas ever or worst Christmas ever.
So what did you guys end up deciding to do? Did you go ahead and test during the time of Christmas, or did you wait a little bit afterwards?
So I bought the test, and yes, we wanted to know. It's kind of like that. We do want to know, but we don't want to know if it's going to be bad news. We were kind of used to getting bad news by this point. So I waited around lunchtime, like I just kept putting it off, and my husband's like, have you done the test yet? And I'm like, no. We made sure that we didn't have any friends or family around us, like we were just by ourselves in case it all went pear-shaped. There were no Christmas plans except this test. And so it was about lunchtime or 1 o'clock in the afternoon by the time I summoned up the courage. Yeah, that was a special day.
A lot of feels, right? Yes. And so how long after were you able to go to your reproductive endocrinologist, so because I know they like to take sonograms and such just to make sure that everything's progressing normally, do the blood testing and such. So you already knew you were pregnant, you had to get your blood test and all those things, and things are progressing. So how were the first few weeks leading after the big fat positive? Were you still dealing with all the emotions and anxieties of something happening, or did you allow yourself to feel happy, I guess is what I'm trying to ask? Or
I think from the moment it actually sunk in that we were pregnant, I just went with it. Like I'd never been pregnant. Not as though I had like a miscarriage or a loss.
Right.
Like obviously the cycle is, one after the other when you lose the eggs, but the most real was the eggs had been put in the right spot and I was actually pregnant, and that was the first time I'd had a positive pregnancy result. So we just jumped into just being so grateful and thankful, and I guess maybe I was a little bit too optimistic in some ways, because I thought we've been through all of this up to this point, surely this is it. This is our baby, like all of this. So now we were just optimistic and positive from the get-go, and had to go blood test and everything, but we already knew. And like we even told people, like we had waited so long, 12 weeks or however long people normally wait until they announce. We'd already told our close family. We didn't want to waste a minute of it.
What year was this? I meant to ask you this a minute ago. What year was this when you got your big fat positive?
So that was 2009.
Okay. 2009. Wow. You guys were going through all that hell, and I had just met my husband then. I'm just thinking about my own personal life. Yeah. Oh, wow. And so was your pregnancy progressing okay at this point into your second trimester and such?
Yeah, so from that point, everything scans and our second scans at 20 weeks and everything was going perfectly. We had left our small country town and moved back to my hometown to be with family, being optimistic that we'd have grandparents around to raise our child and not be so isolated anymore. And so we had left the city where we had done all the fertility treatments and everything. So we just moved back to my hometown, and didn't monitor me as much as they should have. Like I told them that, I had a bicornuate uterus and, just wanted to check that everything was going to be okay, because we had been told when we started the IVF process that I may not go full term because the baby may run out of space in my uterus.
Right. That makes sense with the diagnosis.
Everything seemed to be tracking fine.
So you get to 23 weeks. Was it 23 weeks, 4 days when you lost your son, or was it towards the 24th week?
We're in the 23rd week, I believe. Yes, started getting pains in my back in week 23 of the pregnancy. This was the first to realize obviously what it was initially. Just thought that maybe my back was getting sore because I was getting heavier and bigger, and I'm quite a small person, so I thought maybe I was just having pains in my back. So I had tried to book in a massage and just thought it was that kind of problem. And then a couple of days later, the pain hadn't subsided, and then I noticed a spot of blood, and we went to the hospital to get it checked out.
Did it go by pretty fast? And like, did things, when I had premature labor like you did, it was just going by so fast and so slow at the same time. So when you get there and they bring you back and they start doing the ultrasounds and checking to see if your waters had broken or anything like that, and I'm pretty sure you were just trying to, you saying all the prayers to all the gods, right? Like, just get us through this alive and safe, right? And so at what point did you guys find out while you were in the hospital that you guys had lost him? How did that transpire?
Yeah, so everything happened super quickly. Like, we were babysitting our godson at the time, so my husband dropped me at the hospital and dropped him back to his family so that he could be with me, and I just went into the hospital. Next thing I know, I'm being checked out, and they're saying things like, you're 4 centimeters dilated.
Wow.
And he's coming. Our son arrived 30 minutes later. They tried to stop him from coming, and so I literally went into labour. Was already in labour for the last couple of days, but hadn't realised.
Right, because you were at the point where your body's already doing the Braxton Hicks thing, and it was practicing. So had you had any like Braxton Hicks leading up to that, to your 23rd week, where you just thought maybe it was that and not anything, any kind of complications or anything?
Intense pain in my spine had been, and I later found out that if it's an early labour, that you feel the contractions in your back, not where you would normally feel them. So that made sense after the fact, but I'd never been pregnant before, so at the time it didn't.
You wouldn't have known, right?
I was in labour. No.
Yeah. Wow. So when he was born, what is the protocol for early births in Australia? I just want to compare it to the U.S. and see if it's very similar or not. What is the protocol normally for a baby born in 23 weeks?
So, in my understanding, generally they would try and, get a humidity crib and try and set the baby up and save the baby. In our instance, things didn't go like that at all. It was a small town, and the hospital was supposedly on the phone to a bigger hospital. He was born half an hour after I arrived at the hospital. They were not equipped. And so when he actually arrived and was birthed, they actually just handed him to us and said, here he is. And my husband said, oh, where's the humidity crib? They said, we don't have anything, just hold him.
Oh, wow. I just want to take a minute just to give honor to your son who's no longer with us and who didn't survive. But your baby boy, River, is his name. And so I'm just so sorry for your loss. And I know our listener friends today, there's a lot of them who have suffered such losses. And so I know they will empathize with the level of pain that causes. And it never quite truly goes away. I don't believe, from my experience and just from connecting with others who have been through such things. So just take a moment for baby River and the life of him and the spirit. I know it's still with you guys. Wow.
And as you can see, this was 11 years ago, and the emotions are still there.
Still very, and I can feel it. You're all the way in Australia, but I can tell, and I understand to the level of understanding that I have. Of course, I've never lost like that, so I don't understand it the way you do. But I understand that it's something that never quite goes away, and it's a tough one. Life is hard, and it's so unfair. It's so unfair, and we can do all the practices and we can do all the healing, but love is love, and it's unconditional. When it's unconditional, it remains, and it kind of just sits with us. So, uh, wow, wow. So sorry for you guys' loss. Wow.
Thank you.
So, and I know you said that you used your practices and your studies to help you cope in the beginning before giving birth to baby River. And so after you had given birth to him and you guys, did you guys have a service for him of any sort? I know a lot of people like to do things like that to honor the babies.
Needed to have a funeral because he was, I think it's over 20 weeks or something in Australia.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, we just had a very simple. My husband and I just went and put him a special space in a river.
Wow. Love that.
Nearby.
So befitting. I love that. I love that. And did you find it hard to go back to your studies while you were grieving, when you felt strong enough to do so? Because it's almost like this feeling. I know there's times when things that I've been through, and I'm sure our friends listening today have been through similar times where it's like, what am I even doing all this for when such a horrific thing has happened to me? Did you have moments?
Yeah,
like
there was
that?
obviously a long time, or it feels like a long time. Years and years for me, it was quite quick, but there was definitely a time where I just didn't know how to keep going. Like all your dreams had just come to an end, and the day after we lost River, the doctors were saying, so next time when you go through IVF, we'll do this and we'll do this, prolong the pregnancy. And by that stage, Brett and I were just emotionally and financially done. We just had to, I think we just had to realize that we couldn't keep going with the IVF process.
Yeah.
We were just really tired.
You said earlier in the episode that you always used writing as one of your greatest tools to get through things and to deal with your emotions and to navigate your emotional and mental state and your spiritual state as well. So at what point after your loss, you guys' loss, did you begin to write again? Because I found when I was going through IVF, I didn't write as much. I saved it for afterwards, when there's some healing had taken place. And so it was hard for me to write when I was in it, if that makes sense, Did you have a similar experience, or did you go to writing right away?
Yeah, so I'd been writing throughout. I'd been writing, before the process began of IVF, and I used writing. I also a counselling degree, and I found I had always wanted to use that as a platform to work with others with their grief through my lived experiences. But it took like another 8 years or so before I was ready to work in a space with other people and their grief and loss, to walk through my grief first and be in a space where I
for sure,
in a good place to be able to help.
Yeah, can't pour from an empty cup, right? We always have to, I feel like healers always have to be cognizant of that and remembering to take care of themselves first, because we so quickly jump to help others before we help ourselves sometimes, and using it as a way to cope with our own losses and such in a way. I imagine when you were typing or writing the entire story and what led you to there and through your story of grief and loss and the inner workings of the contents of the book, I imagine it being very difficult writing it, because you have to relive it, and then you have to relive it again through the editing process and things like that. So would you say that you found more healing in completing the book and publishing it? Was it similar to the steps of grief almost?
Yeah, it was. I still can't even read back the book or certain passages without, just being in that space again and getting teary. People who have bought and read my book already have told me that it's quite an emotional read as well, and they read it in doses with tissues. So it's
Yeah.
definitely been a healing journey for me, seeing it to fruition, like not just writing it, because it started practice for me to do my healing, but now to be able to publish it and put it out there and share it with other people, and then be able to hear their stories and see how it helps them with their healing. I think it's almost come full circle.
Right. So I unfortunately have not received the book yet. I ordered it when Narelle and I first started talking about her coming onto the pod about a month or so ago. And so unfortunately, the U.S. mail system sucks right now with this COVID stuff. It has been for the last 2 years, the worst. So I would have received it by now. I've gotten books from other people in the community and such, and I would have gotten it by now. It's just like so crazy. Of course, when I need it for an interview, I can't get it, right? So unfortunately, I have not been able to read it yet, and I can't wait to get my hands on it and read it, and then also come back and be able to give you guys my full circle thoughts about the book and how I think it could help you as well. But if there's nothing else that you would like others, mothers and fathers and spouses to know about grief and loss at this magnitude, Narelle, what would you say to them to help them along their process to healing?
Grief is unique for all of us, and we all do it in different ways. So if it helps you to write about it, to talk about it, to go out and run, or punch a punching bag, whatever you need to do is just what you need to do. That's how you can honor that grief and the loss. I think that's really important. And if there's no one who's willing to talk about it with you, because often in our society, people like you, Monique, are doing an amazing job of, opening up this conversation and this topic for discussion. And that's what I try to do with my counselling practice and my book as well, so that we can have people that are willing to listen and talk about it, because I think that's really cathartic for lots of us.
Normalize talking about the emotions and not just talking about what the heck our spouses did yesterday that ticked us off and stuff, just going beyond the surface level of things. And so that when there is, because I feel like a lot of times when we have these conversations, you don't actually find out that other people have dealt with it or are dealing with it until you become open and allow the universe to use you to be open about your story, or to just have a conversation privately with a friend or some other loved one or something like that. So I think that's great. And I agree wholeheartedly that, we seek community, seek help from specialists like Narelle and counseling and whatever you need to do. I did Reiki a lot when I was in the midst of things. So I get it, and I know that it works. If you want it to work, it'll work for you, and we just have to find what works for us. So I definitely agree, and I totally understand how that feels to have to work through that. And so how can we find you online? Where can we get your book as well?
Postage and the system at the moment with getting books overseas, it has taken 6 months to get my books overseas, but they are finally there. So you can now get my book overseas on Book Depository or Amazon.com. And if you're in Australia, Hudson.com, or on platforms in Australia. So if it's not in your local bookstore and you want to support your independent bookstore, then ask for it and they'll be able to order it for you.
Wonderful. And I will have, Narelle's, all of her information will be in the show details, so you guys know where to find her book, as well as where to find her online and on Instagram. Any guests that we have, all the information is in the show details, you guys. And you guys already know where to find me at Infertility And Me podcast on IG only. I'm not on Facebook and or TikTok. So if there's anybody else with an account that says Infertility And Me podcast, it is not me. I am only on IG and through my website, MoniqueFarouk.com. So again, Narelle, I appreciate you so much, dear, for telling us about your story of loss and what has brought you to a place of healing now, even though it still sticks with us in many, many ways. And so I just appreciate you because you got up so very early to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me. I think it's really important that we talk about it. Even all these years later, there's still grief there and there's still tears, but I think it's also important to normalize that.
Thank you, friends, for tuning in to another episode of Infertility and Me podcast. Thank you.